Deep underground, in a dark, empty dirt chamber, a single queen ant sits entirely alone in the shadows. She is permanently bound to this tiny cavern. She will never return to the surface, meaning every worker, soldier, and scout that will eventually protect her must be forged using only her own internal bodily reserves. Her immediate objective is strictly biological. She must manage to rear her first generation of workers to forage for her, before her own limited energy completely depletes. From day one, she is locked in a race against her own metabolism. A single misstep, or a few wasted days, means she dies in the dark, taking her potential empire with her. Up on the surface, the terrain is just as unforgiving. This nest sits on a domestic windowsill, a highly contested stretch of territory. A massive, fully established wild ant colony already claims this land, sending out scouts daily to patrol the borders. If one of those wild scouts detects the fledgling nest before the queen has an army to defend it, the wild colony will invade. They will execute her and annex the territory. These next 1,000 days represent an inevitable, escalating arms race between this vulnerable upstart and the neighboring superpower. After weeks of isolation, her first generation of workers finally breaches the surface, immediately beginning to forage and construct the colony's baseline infrastructure. This diagram illustrates their economic engine. Workers bring raw seeds to an underground bakery, crushing them into high-calorie ant bread, fed directly to growing larvae. This caloric engine works. By day 70, the colony experiences an exponential population spike. But rapid growth creates a problem. The new workers are clumsy and inexperienced. When they discover high-energy sugars, like a drop of honey, they feed erratically and leave the precious resource completely exposed. That exposure acts like a beacon. A wild scout stumbles upon the unguarded honey, runs back to her nest, and alerts the swarm. The invasion is swift and brutal. The wild ants pour into the nest, effortlessly overwhelming the young, uncoordinated defenders and butchering a massive portion of the colony. The few ants that survive the slaughter spend hours dragging the enemy out of their tunnels, eventually stacking their own fallen sisters in a dedicated, structured graveyard. They learned a hard lesson. Scaling an economy without establishing equally robust defensive protocols leaves you entirely exposed to aggressive competitors. Months later, the weakened colony recovers. Encountering another source of honey, their approach is noticeably different. Instead of leaving it in the open, workers gather tiny grains of dirt and debris, carefully placing them directly over the honey. They are actively burying it. This creates a physical camouflage system, effectively masking the rich scent of the sugars from any passing wild scouts. The workers instantly adapted their resource management strategy based on the trauma of the previous attack, adjusting their behavior to ensure they remain undetected and their queen stays safe. By day 600, the colony has expanded into a massive, multi-chambered fortress. The population has surged into the thousands, with workers operating with a singular, high-speed coordination that signals a shift toward a military footing. To test these new defenses, 100 live fruit flies are dropped into their foraging territory. The workers react instantly. They panic the swarm, isolating the flies and systematically hunting down the vast majority with lethal precision. But the hunt isn't flawless. A handful of fruit flies manage to slip past the defensive perimeter and scatter. Those escaped flies drift off the windowsill and directly into the territory of the wild colony, inadvertently handing the enemy a massive influx of pure calories. Armed with this sudden surplus of high-value food, the wild colony experiences a population explosion of its own, rapidly expanding their borders deeper into the room. The captive colony's hunting prowess unintentionally fed their enemy. Now, both empires are operating at maximum capacity, fully armed and on a direct collision course. On day 1000, the tension breaks. The wild colony launches a full-scale offensive, overwhelming the entrance and breaching the underground nest. The outer defenses instantly collapse. As the invaders flood the upper tunnels, the captive workers are forced to watch their vulnerable larvae be slaughtered one by one. Facing total annihilation, the colony executes a drastic contingency plan. The workers completely abandon the outer nest and leave their remaining young behind to die. Look at this cross-section of the nest during the invasion. Red markers representing the enemy flood the upper tunnels, while blue defenders deliberately retreat to the deepest chamber, packing tightly together to form an impenetrable living shield entirely encasing the queen. In the logic of the colony, individual lives and the entire current generation of offspring are strictly expendable. They mathematically sacrifice the many to protect the one reproductive engine of the empire. But they don't stay on the defensive. Once the queen is secured at the base, the living shield stops retreating, rallies its lines, and launches an aggressive counterattack. The remaining workers surge upward through the tunnels. They fight with complete disregard for their own survival, pushing the invaders out of the deepest chambers, and eventually breaching the surface in a massive counteroffensive. The wild colony breaks. The captive ants rout the invaders entirely, permanently eradicating the threat from their territory. 1,000 days ago, this entire colony was just one vulnerable insect sitting alone in the dark, restricted by her own biology and surrounded by a hostile world. Today, they hold the territory undisputed. The resilience of this system isn't derived from sheer numbers. It survives because the collective can endure massive casualties, instantly adapt its behavioral protocols, and execute absolute selfless sacrifice to guarantee its future.